What, in your opinion, is the biggest thing that needs to change for the industry to become more inclusive? In my opinion, the hate. The hate needs to be, I think, monitored a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I feel like, too, again, there needs to be people in like these positions of power that have open ears and that are willing to listen if there isn't a woman or a marginalized person in that seat already, that are willing to listen to people who are saying, hey, this is a problem. And then them being able to say, well, then how do we fix it? I feel like we lack that sometimes. And even if they're willing to fix it, like sometimes in the gaming industry, doing what's good isn't necessarily popular because the player base is used to acting a certain way. So you don't want to ruin their fun. Like Call of Duty is a great example of this. If you want to create a safe space for everybody, if that's truly your mission as a creative, as a company, whatever, you're going to have to step on some people's toes. And the people who have a problem with it don't belong there in the first place.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, like you're saying, we need more active actions from people within the industry in order to curb the kind of hate that you get. You know, if you're going to make like lobbies for people that have been reported, let them go play by themselves in the cesspit that they've created. You know, you don't necessarily have to ban them so that they, you know, come back with another account. Just, you know, just block them in with people of their own kind. That doesn't necessarily solve the issue though, but it's a step, I guess. In terms of solutions, it's a difficult one because you have to prove first, like you were saying, to the people higher up that this is a real problem that needs to be taken care of. And I think there is, again, not enough conversation that surrounds that.
Yeah, there's definitely a clear divide, you know? There's the people who want to make the world and they want to make it better. And then there's the people who don't. And, you know, when you are creating those seats for those people at the table, it really minimizes voices like ours. And, you know, when one is enough.
Right.
Yeah, truly.
And I definitely want to, first of all, y'all made some wonderful points. I think that kind of ties in with what I think, you know, kind of needs to be done is just more stuff to keep us safe, because, you know, when there's little to no, you know, in the realm of Twitter, because I think that could even be considered, you know, part of the gaming space, because so many of us use Twitter to, you know, for business, for work, whether it's the content creators, the developers, the publishers, the community managers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you can include that. If we have someone who on Twitter is being, Twitch doesn't matter, just anywhere that's being like, you know, racist, transphobic, misogynist, et cetera, they need to, you know, be held accountable for that and not get like a little slap on the wrist or, hey, your account is locked for 24 hours, or we didn't see anything wrong with this and we're not going to take any action at all. Or, you know, the fact that I think a huge problem is for one, we have these very large, you know, people in very like big positions of power and people with very large platforms, from the content creators to even the companies within gaming, you know, themselves. One of them specifically being Activision Blizzard, how we have so many different like sort of bad players, people that have power and influence that are actively promoting and cultivating and being complicit in a lot of the stuff, you know, racism, misogyny, transphobia, trans misogyny, et cetera, ableism, you know, if it's any sort of ism or phobia that you can think of is, yeah, it's happening. And the biggest problem is, even if you don't have these people who are actively promoting this stuff, they're being complicit. And so it's like, they might as well be, you know, they're not holding their communities accountable when they have someone within in their circle, whether they're a friend or just a viewer, whatever, you know, when they're saying and posting problematic things, they don't say anything because either they don't care or they care more about, viewership count and things of that sort than doing what's right. Unfortunately, sometimes you'll even see people that are marginalized that don't do this because historically we've had such little representation, such little opportunities as compared to our, non-marginalized counterparts. I think what happens is we get, I don't want to say desperate, but we get excited to get these opportunities. So then you'll see people who get into this mindset of, well, I don't want to mess this up by, being outspoken about this or saying something about that XYZ. But at the end of the day, and one of the sort of the biggest things that I preach is, having something that you stand for, because that I know that so much of what we do as, women, as, a woman that's trans, a woman that's disabled, a woman, women that are, part Latin, so much of what we do is rooted in our survival and being safe. And so I think a lot of what we do is sort of that natural sort of subconscious survival. But so I think that for the folks that do these sort of things, or just kind of stand back, the marginalized folks that do, I don't think it's necessarily coming from a bad place of ill intent. I think it's survival, because we historically haven't had these opportunities. So when we do get those opportunities, a lot of us don't want to mess that up. But, but it's at the same time, it's not even on them fully. Where the majority of this falls on is the people with power. And we know historically that, groups like us, we don't have power. So if we get the people that do have the most power, the most influence, the money, or determines where the money goes, et cetera, those people have to be on board, because it doesn't matter, if you have, everybody on the Twitch platform, everybody on the YouTube platform as creators could band together for a specific cause. But if the people that are the ones calling the shots, or the audience that have, influence over making things happen, if they're not on board with it, we're not going to see anything happen. And that's what I think that's what the case is too often, is where we see sort of the people that do have the power and influence kind of blocking these changes from being made. And it's just we've seen so many strides within the gaming space, especially for women, but it sometimes feels like we can only have one thing. It's we're getting increased visibility for women, but not women who are Black or trans or disabled. So, and there's so much of that intersectionality to keep in mind. And so I just hope that as we're seeing sort of this improvement in these strides that people are making to do right by women, they also consider the other parts of our identity, because so often I think people try to make us choose between our identities. Are you Black? Are you a woman? Are you, what are you first? And it's everything that I am, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm queer, I'm all those things at once. You can't separate the two. And I feel like a lot of people try to separate those are different parts of our identity in a way to try to give us scraps and give us, give us scraps. And they try to get away with that. And we're putting our foot down and saying, no, you have to treat all parts of me, all parts of my identity and my humanity equally.
I really do think that you make a great point there. And I do want to go back and touch on something that you said, that it's really the larger voices, the loudest voices need to join in on these conversations and actually stand up for people. There was an instance that happened, I believe it was last year, with the hate raids that were happening on Twitch specifically. If I give you an anecdote, they were targeting marginalized communities, whether or not it was people of color or the queer community. They were affecting a huge swathe of people on Twitch. And so the reaction to that was to create a movement called A Day Off of Twitch, where people were encouraged just to not watch Twitch for a day, not stream for the day. And one of the biggest things that happened during that was a bunch of large streamers coming out in opposition to any form of protest whatsoever. at saying that this isn't going to work, I'm not going to get involved. I would, like, famously, one streamer said, I would totally get involved if other big streamers got involved first. The problem with that was they were so outspoken against it, is that their fans also just repeated their talking points. And when A Day Off of Twitch actually happened, it did have an impact. There were articles written about it. It had much more media attention, and obviously Twitch, who were probably already focusing on a solution, actually made a statement about it and decided to probably put more resources in that basket, most likely. We had changes that were made because of this form of protest. But how much better would it have been for the community if these large streamers had actually stood up and said, you know, yeah, this is a problem. This is something that I agree with. I'm actually going to back this 100%. You know, adding those large voices into the conversation that could have made things potentially go faster, rather than just ignoring things that don't necessarily affect them.
Well, and not to mention when you have so often, I mean, we see it regularly, right? Men act like they can only listen to other men a lot of the time, you know? And so you need to have one of the biggest issues, because as we're, you know, talking about gender, you know, we know who holds the power dynamic here, and, you know, and that's cis men. And so the problem, I think that's ultimately what could all be summed up into one thing, is just you have so many, you know, cis men who are not as outspoken about this, because when they are outspoken about it, and that's a whole nother can of worms that I don't want to open up, but when, you know, a lot of times when they're outspoken about this, they get accused of either being queer, as if that's a bad thing. We know how that goes. Either they're accused of being queer or wanting, you know, trying to get something out of their solidarity to women. You know, romantic interests and things of that nature. And I think although I'm sure that individuals like that exist, a lot of times it gets dismissed when men speak up about it. And so it kind of feels like a lose-lose situation. It's like, well, when women talk about these things, you don't listen. And then we try to get, you know, when there's men who genuinely want to talk about these things, it's, you know, it's either a matter of, you know, they brush that off, or even if they do listen, it's so frustrating, because it's like, well, we've been saying this for how long, but it took a man saying it to make you listen. And it just really is unfortunate that it seems like a lot of the time we have to be accompanied by the demographic or the group that holds that power in that power dynamic situation. And in this, you know, as it relates to gender, it's cis men. We should not have to have them hand-holding us. It shouldn't be a situation where the only time that stuff gets done is when they jump in the line of fire for us. When in reality, that should be the default. That should be the sort of status quo. We shouldn't have to rely on, you know, our male allies to make stuff happen. We shouldn't have to do that. And that in itself, I think, is a less talked about, like, sort of symptom of patriarchy, is when we're sort of made to rely and have to, you know, basically survive under the protection of men. I think having society function even in that way is a huge issue that I don't think it's talked about a lot.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, it's like these men who are, you know, in power, with the money, the influence, the everything. While we do have some that do champion for, you know, marginalized identities, there are those that really don't. And, you know, like circling back on what Pika was talking about, where, you know, these people with the power, the money, the influence, like, they're the ones who ultimately make the decision on a lot of these spaces and the way that things are sort of allocated. And at the end of the day, they just need to be on board with diversity. So, like, from a corporate standpoint, we've all seen the mass layoffs, right? When it comes to those layoffs, some of the first departments that tend to lose resources tend to be the diversity departments. And that's because typically, even when someone is building a company, the very last place they allocate resources is diversity. And it's the last place to get allocated resources, and it's the first place to get them taken away. And I think that, you know, at the top, they need to be educated on those resources and understand how taking that away minimizes voices like ours and people like us. And those resources are just as important as other resources like marketing, etc. And, you know, from like a business standpoint, it's like when you are making room at that table for those diverse voices as well, you're also bringing in those audiences. Because if you are not, let's say, if you're not really putting out product or stuff, like your brand is just not anyone else friendly, like let's say it's mostly like cis white aligning, you're not going to get people from other communities participating in that. So at the bottom line, like opening that space for those marginalized communities will also help them as a business as well. So there's no reason for them to really think like, oh, I need to cut these resources because this doesn't matter, when in actuality it does matter. It does matter for a people's perspective, making everything more inclusive, and then also it does benefit the company. So it's like, I think more leaders need to be more educated on how taking those resources away really does hurt these communities and how it also kind of hurts them. There might be people who don't listen. And I think in a way to make the space more inclusive and to make more space for our voices, creators and influencers and just people in general need to be educated more on how they can make those companies listen. So like Twitter, such a powerful tool. People protest on it and people can genuinely make a difference. But there's also other ways, and sometimes not everyone is most educated on how like effective those other ways can be. But that's a whole nother playground of just talking in conversation. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think we have more time on this roundtable, guys.
That's the worst part about these conversations is like there's so much like meat and potatoes.
Like, how deep do you want to go? Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it's like, and I feel like we unfortunately barely even scratch the surface, because it's so, when you're talking about issues that have been going on since the beginning of time and that are so deeply rooted into society, it's like, how much time you got, how many hours you got for us to sit and talk about this? So
yeah, absolutely. And like, I'm just glad that we had the opportunity to really like sort of dig deep. And even though we might not necessarily have had enough time to talk about all of this, like, I'm glad we touched on the systemic issues.
Same.
Like that is truly at the root of a lot of this. And, you know, just overall talking about our experiences, you know, learning more about each of you and just having the time to just have a real conversation with real people. It's really just been nice.
Invaluable, definitely.
It's been really nice talking with y'all. It's been
fantastic.
It really has. Well, I know we're at time. And I just want to go ahead and say thank you so much to those of you out there watching this VOD for watching. To see more from each of our guests here, Mia, Dynamic, Pika, make sure you head to the description. If you want to learn more about how Logitech approaches diversity and inclusion, we've got links for that down below. And then also for more Logitech roundtables, check out our accessibility in gaming and Black content creator discussions. And make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another Logitech video. Logitech, thank you so much for creating the space for all of us to talk about these important issues and the things that drive us and really keep us going in this space. We appreciate you and your support that you give to people like us all year long. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.